Hello! This is Hooked by Happenstance. I'm Kendra, and it is time for chapter 24 of Yarn Tales. Yarn Tales is my ongoing series where I read books, I tell you a bit about them, and then I apply silly Kendra rules to my star rating of the book and add a segment to my reading shawl, which has become Shawls. And since I'm currently in the middle of talking about books that I read during a readathon, I also add some beads. So today's book is called What Came from the Stars by Gary D. Schmidt. I listened to this via audiobook through RB Digital, and I listened to it on my TV. It took me a couple of nights to get through it. It's not a particularly long book. It's only about 6 hours and 42 minutes. I've written 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 9 seconds. When listened to at like 100% speed, I actually listened to it faster, so it didn't take that long, thankfully. So this book I read because of Buzzwordathon. Buzzwordathon was a readathon that takes place in multiple cycles. Every cycle there is a buzzword, and the goal is to focus on books that have that word in the title. Instead of having one word this time, the Buzzwordathon covered who, what, when, where, why, and how. So 6 words, 1 week. So many possibilities. And I, as one might guess, was endeavoring to read a book for every word. So I went through my 2 library services that I get audiobooks from, and I searched for the buzzwords and saw what was available in each category, and then I had kind of mapped out a TBR that would be a to-be-read list. That would be books for me to experience with my kids, as well as alone. And then I also ended up reading some ebooks too. All things that I got digitally through my library services for free. So this was one of the few books that came up as available at the time that had the word what in it. I was also looking at doing juvenile books primarily because I knew they would be shorter and I could get through them faster than like some of the longer, especially like fantasy books that were adult and would be like 2 or 3 times as long. So I didn't really want to get into a 13 or 17 hour book. A 6-hour book was much more what I was looking for so that I could cover the number of books that I wanted to cover. So this book had won awards and seemed like a good pick. It was a juvenile fiction, suspense, thriller, fantasy, according to the way it was cataloged in the library, which things that have suspense and thriller in them are not always my cup of tea. I mean, they frequently are not, but they are more likely to be my cup of tea when they are juvenile. Adult suspense thrillers are no-goes for me, just as a pretty overarching rule. So I started listening to this book, and it started real weird. It had a dual story. It alternated chapters between something going on with aliens and something going on with people here on Earth who were a family, primarily a boy and his sister and his dad, and his mom had died fairly recently. And so the earthly portion deals with their grieving process and what's going on in their life and their story. And then it's also influenced by the alien god. I don't really know. This book was real confusing. Like, I don't remember the last time I made it all the way through a book that confused me this much. I also just don't remember a book confusing me this much because there were parts of the book that I liked so much for how lost I was when they would switch to the other narrative. So I don't really know. And even in the parts where the outer worldly beings were involved with the humans, again, I was really confused. But when it was just humans and humans interacting, it was enjoyable. I liked it just fine, but so confusing otherwise. So if you're looking for books to read, I would not recommend this book in the slightest. I give the book 2 stars. The reason it got 2 stars was I did think the way that they talked about grief and the, especially the parts around him explaining his mother's death and stuff, that was really good and really well written and really like touching, but all the other stuff was just strange. And I don't know if it was just me and my feelings on certain genres and things I do and don't like, you know, get on board with or what, but it was bad. Bad for me. So 2 stars, but it did reach one of my requirements for the readathon, and it is made for a pretty segment in my shawl. So here is my reading shawl. I just dropped my hook in the process. I'm using 4 different yarns for this shawl. There is a yarn for books that I experience with my children, a yarn for books from my Life's Library subscription service where I get a new book every 6 weeks, physical books that I experience by myself, and audiobooks that I experience by myself. And this fell into that audiobook category. So here we are. Now, for the books for the readathon, to make them a little bit more special, I decided I would put some beads into the row. And so I added these seed beads. They're like number 8. Are they size 8? Yes, and they're size 8 beads that I just happen to have on hand. And I added them in to the pattern section. The way that I do this is every yarn type also has a pattern row that goes with it. I put 1 pattern row in, and then I do a row of textured single crochet for each star that I give the book. Well, this book didn't get very many stars, so it didn't get very many rows. But the beads are nice. I'm looking forward to seeing how the beaded sections kind of stand out once the shawl is all done. They are going to be toward the bottom-ish, so I think they will help the lace to spread out, and they will just add a nice little hint of something. I used Lolo Did It yarn on the original base in a one-of-a-kind color called Blarney Castle. So it's kind of funny with not enjoying this book. I could have been a wee bit discouraged because this was not the first book that I had read for this readathon that I didn't like, but I feel like that's kind of a cool thing about readathons. Like, they give me the challenges. There's usually prompts that go along with them, and I try to, you know, fit the things in. In this case, the prompts are to read things that have the buzzword in them. And so I'm looking for books outside of my comfort zone, or at least the way that I'm searching for them is different than usual. So I'm not going to come up with the same types of books and the same books that I would ordinarily choose for myself. Now, I feel like that does leave me open to a greater likelihood that the books will not be for me. Because in a lot of ways, I for certain know what I do like. I don't always know what I don't like. It's one of those things where you don't know it till you have tried it. And I can assume a lot about what kind of books I won't like. But then I've tried some books that I thought I would not be a huge fan of and turned out to really, really enjoy them. So I am really embracing this whole readathon concept. I'm trying not to do more than 1 a month. But when I do them, I'm trying to actually try to stick to the prompts and see what's out there, because I am growing not so much as a reader in the sense of like, oh, I'm reading more books and seeing growth that way, but more I'm reading more varied books and I'm enjoying a greater variety of them. So I'm very glad that I took on the challenge, even if it turned out to be a book that I did not like. Now, 2 stars, I do feel like falls into the I'm not a huge fan category. I didn't like it, but it did have some redeeming qualities. Like I said, the way it dealt with that family dynamic and grief was good. Everything else, not for me. So that is the segment for what came from the stars. It's pretty short and sweet. The book was fairly short, and I probably could have gotten through it all in one evening, except it was a little taxing for me to experience it, so it took a little longer. But at least I got to crochet while I did it, and I was enjoying that, so the time was not wasted. If you would like to see more of the Yarn Tales chapters here on the channel, there is a playlist that has everything that I've read this year, as well as some stuff from last year's reading shawl, which followed a different kind of system, but still, if you want to hear about the books I read last year, those are there. And subscribe down below so you don't miss out on the rest of the Yarn Tales chapters, because they don't come out in a regulated schedule, and that way they will just float to the top of your sub feed when I do post them. I will see you all next time. Bye!